What if the person you loved the most wasn't who you thought they were? Not a stranger, not an enemy, but someone who shared your bed, your table, your dreams, and yet moved through your life like a well-trained thief, lifting pieces of your soul without ever breaking a window. That's how it began for Elias Quinn, not with a fight or a betrayal screamed through slammed doors, but with silence, with a forgotten wine glass, a phone left unlocked just long enough, a new name in an old conversation, small, ordinary cracks that, when you step back, reveal the architecture of collapse. Elias wasn't a soldier. He didn't carry a weapon, but he built the systems that decided when and where weapons would fire. He understood code better than he understood people, and that's exactly why they chose him. This isn't a story about infidelity. It's about infiltration. It's not just revenge, it's a dismantling. Of a marriage, of a mission, of the illusion that we ever really know the people closest to us. So before you decide who's right or wrong, before you pass judgment, listen. Because sometimes the person they call a traitor is the only one telling the truth. Elias Quinn didn't wake up one day and realize his life was over. That kind of drama belongs in fiction. In reality, things unravel slowly, like threads slipping loose from the hem of a shirt you've worn too long, too often, thinking it would always hold. He was a systems architect for a federal defense contractor, the quiet kind of brilliant, the kind that understood how satellites talk to drones better than how people talk to each other. His work lived in layers of logic and encrypted signal, trees, places where everything either made sense or didn't exist at all. Sienna, his wife, lived on the other side of that world. She worked in external operations for Nova Intel, a private security contractor with deep ties to intelligence and a deeper appetite for secrets. Sienna knew how to command a room, how to make generals lean in, how to make Elias feel like he was the smartest man in the world until the day she stopped trying. It was subtle at first, a longer pause before answering, an unfamiliar cologne on her jacket, the growing weight of quiet between them during breakfast. Elias didn't pry. He observed. That's what he did best. Log patterns, detect anomalies. He'd built protocols that identified satellite misfires in less than a second. It didn't take him much longer to realize his marriage was flickering just as fast. One morning, Sienna left early, earlier than usual. She'd stopped drinking coffee altogether, claimed it made her anxious. She stopped asking him if he'd be home for dinner. And when she did kiss him goodbye, it was no longer on the lips, always the cheek, the forehead. As if she were comforting a child, not leaving a partner. He watched her walk out the door and sat alone in their kitchen, his hand wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold. That day, he didn't go into the office. Instead, he watched their home through a different lens, the same one he used in systems diagnostics. He saw it like a live map, entry points, signal traffic, activity logs. He checked their shared calendar, noted inconsistencies, logged them mentally at first, then digitally. That afternoon, through the kitchen window, he saw a black SUV pull into their cul-de-sac. It was unmarked but unmistakably military. The man who stepped out wore no uniform but moved like he'd earned one. Elias didn't need an introduction. He'd seen the internal memos, the contractor briefs. Adrian Rourke, Nova's newly appointed regional director, transferred from a post in the Middle East after a classified operation left more questions than medals. Sienna met him at the curb. She wasn't surprised. She was glowing. Rourke said something that made her laugh, and she reached out just lightly, resting her hand on his arm. That single moment hit Elias harder than any argument ever could. Not because of what it proved, but because of how natural it looked, as if it had already been happening, as if she no longer saw the need to hide. He didn't confront her that night. He didn't ask who A was in her call log. Instead, he worked late. And by worked, he started building something, a separate project folder disguised on his server labeled Archive 74. Inside it, he began collecting data, not as a husband, as a systems analyst. When Sienna came home just after midnight, her excuse was forgettable, a debriefing that ran long. She kissed his forehead, told him she was exhausted. He just nodded, let her go upstairs without a word. He stayed at the kitchen table long after she'd gone to bed, staring at the wall calendar. Then he circled the date, not because anything exploded, but because everything started to decay. And that's the thing most people don't understand. Betrayal doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it's a whisper, a missing laugh, a misplaced glance. Elias didn't scream. He didn't accuse. He simply began tracing the shadows inside his own life, realizing too late that someone had already been mapping them longer than he had. Elias didn't need proof to know something was wrong, but proof gave his instincts teeth. In the days that followed, he observed Sienna with the clarity of someone watching his own life from a distance. He began documenting subtle deviations. Her car parked on different sides of the driveway. Her route to Deceit, work inexplicably changing. The scent of unfamiliar shampoo that lingered after late showers. Most damning of all were the smiles, those carefully curated expressions meant for someone else, not him. She still touched his shoulder in passing, still asked about his work, in the same tone one might ask how long leftovers had been in the fridge. The intimacy was hollow, rehearsed, functional. But it was the smile she gave Adrian Rourke that broke something inside Elias, because it was real, spontaneous, unapologetic. He first caught it on a surveillance feed, one he mirrored, from the Nova systems where he held limited clearance, a routine internal footage cache, or so the access logs claimed. There they were in the East Wing corridor near Briefing Room 12. She wasn't speaking, just listening, but her body angled toward Rourke, and when he leaned in to whisper something, she didn't flinch. She smiled soft and wide. The same smile Elias hadn't seen in nearly a year. That night he stared at her phone while she showered. It buzzed once, then again. No name, just the letter A. He knew her passcode, had since before they married. But he didn't open the messages. Not yet. Instead, he logged the number, exported the metadata, and set up a silent trace on a cloned burner device, a trick he'd learned during a cybersecurity exchange with an Israeli White Hat team. From now on, every call, every message, every whispered command would be archived. What he found over the next 72 hours stripped away, whatever denial still clung to him. I checked his access logs again. Still clean, he has no idea. He's too focused on the interface build. Then another. When it's time we push phase 2, he won't even blink. She wasn't just lying to him. She was handling him, like a target. The affair was real. That much was obvious, but the context had changed. It wasn't romantic betrayal alone, it was tactical. Sienna wasn't merely cheating. She was executing a play. And Elias? He was the mark. He played the audio twice, 3 times. Each time the same voice. Calm, precise. Hers. In the following days, Elias did not confront her. Instead, he set up what he called the loop. He wired the lamp in the living room with a miniature mic loopback, installed a vibration-activated recorder in the HVAC vent of their ensuite bathroom, synced all data to a private vault stored in an offline drive embedded in his old childhood Game Boy. No network logs, no cloud, just analog discipline. Every conversation, every interaction became data. When she asked how his day went, he logged the tonal shift in her voice. When she claimed she'd be back by 9 but arrived after midnight, he logged the gap in real time against a known vehicle route sourced through her phone's GPS. The pattern emerged clearly, efficiently. She wasn't improvising. She was following steps. And Adrian Rourke wasn't just a lover. He was a handler. One morning, Sienna left her laptop open in the kitchen. Rare. Careless. Perhaps she assumed he'd stopped paying attention. Perhaps she wanted him to see. The screen showed an internal messaging thread, a draft not yet sent. He's quiet, too quiet. He'll break eventually, but not the way we expected. Below it, a time-stamped photo of Elias in his office, taken from outside their house, a reflection of him visible in the window, coding, unaware. Elias stared at the image, the message, her, and then he understood. She wasn't trying to get rid of him. She was trying to use him. His access, his software, his credibility. They didn't want a divorce. They wanted deniability. So Elias made a choice. He deleted the copied messages, wiped the voice recordings, and transferred everything to a second layer of encryption under a folder labeled Framework. He closed the laptop, looked at the empty chair across from him at the kitchen table, and whispered not with anger, but certainty. You broke the wrong man. Because Sienna Vale had made one critical miscalculation. She thought the man who built systems couldn't dismantle one from the inside. Elias knew that to bring down something built from lies, he couldn't just confront it. He had to outthink it. In the days that followed, he transformed from husband to operator. Every corner of their house became a node in his private surveillance web. He monitored phone frequencies, created silent syncs of Sienna's messages, and installed a subroutine on her personal device that fed mirrored data back to a clean drive buried under a tool chest in the garage. He called it Mirror Protocol, not because it reflected her, but because it would show her exactly what she had made him become. The hardest part wasn't the coding or the hiding. It was pretending he hadn't noticed her new perfume, the way she laughed a little too hard at texts she didn't explain. Pretending that the woman he loved wasn't quietly dismantling his life, one manipulated clearance log at a time, but Elias didn't react. He adapted. At work, he kept his posture steady and his expression unreadable. He let Rourke compliment his satellite AI model in front of the senior committee. Let him grin, shake his hand, speak to him like a man who'd already been replaced, both professionally and personally. Elias simply nodded, logging every word. But what he found next pushed things far beyond infidelity or even sabotage. Late one night, in the solitude of his home lab, Elias sifted through a batch of encrypted data packets rerouted from Sienna's device. One of them contained a partial system dump from Nova's secure server, files he never should have had access to. Inside, a project codename Obsidian Halo, buried in a subfolder titled Civilian Contingency Response Network. The specs were disturbingly familiar. His own AI framework, his pattern recognition code, designed to predict and prevent mass casualty drone failures, had been retooled. Not for defense, but for preemptive strike protocol. Against targets labeled unverified threat clusters. No names, no warrants. No oversight. They were using his life's work to kill first and ask nothing later. Worse still, the deployment order was already queued, pending final override authorization. And the access key? A single chilling message accompanied the file. Final stage requires engineer clearance. Use fallback psychological failsafe if necessary. Subject is emotionally compromised, trackable. Subject. That's what he was now. Not Elias, not husband, not architect. Subject. He stood up from his desk and walked to the bathroom mirror, stared at himself, hair messy, eyes bloodshot. His reflection didn't blink, and in that moment, he stopped, seeing himself as a victim. He began to see the battlefield. The next morning, he activated the first layer of his counterplan. At the coffee shop near the agency annex, he met with Mason Duell, a former cyber analyst turned off-grid contractor. They hadn't spoken in 4 years, not since a classified blackout assignment in Belgium. Mason didn't ask why Elias wanted to meet, just looked at the burner phone Elias slid across the table. You want these traced? No, Elias said quietly. I want them turned back on the people who sent them. Mason raised an eyebrow. You know what happens if we do that? Elias nodded. Yes, I'm counting on it. That same day, he initiated Phase 0, a dummy update file labeled AI Calibration Patch 4.1 was pushed to Nova's cloud servers using Sienna's credentials. It did nothing, except ping the server twice with a hidden sequence tag. A heartbeat. A silent flag. From that moment forward, every change made to the Obsidian Halo framework would mirror back to Elias's private archive. Every overwritten line of code. Every request. Every name. including Rourke's. Elias watched the logs spool in like a storm forming in slow motion. That night, as Sienna slept upstairs, her breathing soft and even, Elias sat on the living room floor surrounded by cables and old hard drives. No anger in his eyes, just precision. His fingers moved like a surgeon's. Not to destroy, not yet. To document. To preserve everything they thought he wouldn't see. Because revenge, Elias understood now, wasn't an outburst. It was a process, and the first step was making sure you never had to raise your voice. Only the truth. Elias knew that to bring down something built from lies, he couldn't just confront it. He had to outthink it. In the days that followed, he transformed from husband to operator. Every corner of their house became a node in his private surveillance web. He monitored phone frequencies, created silent syncs of Sienna's messages, and installed a subroutine on her personal device that fed mirrored data back to a clean drive buried under a tool chest in the garage. He called it Mirror Protocol, not because it reflected her, but because it would show her exactly what she had made him become. The hardest part wasn't the coding or the hiding. It was pretending. Pretending he hadn't noticed her new perfume, the way she laughed a little too hard at texts she didn't explain. Pretending that the woman he loved wasn't quietly dismantling his life, one manipulated clearance log at a time. But Elias didn't react. He adapted. At work, he kept his posture steady and his expression unreadable. He let Rourke compliment his satellite AI model in front of the senior committee. Let him grin, shake his hand, speak to him like a man who'd already been replaced, both professionally and personally. Elias simply nodded, logging every word. But what he found next pushed things far beyond infidelity or even sabotage. Late one night, in the solitude of his home lab, Elias sifted through a batch of encrypted data packets rerouted from Sienna's device. One of them contained a partial system dump from Nova's secure server, files he never should have had access to. Inside, a project codename Obsidian Halo, buried in a subfolder titled Civilian Contingency Response Network. The specs were disturbingly familiar. His own AI framework, his pattern recognition code, designed to predict and prevent mass casualty drone failures, had been retooled. Not for defense, but for preemptive strike protocol. Against targets labeled unverified threat clusters. No names, no warrants. No oversight. They were using his life's work to kill first and ask nothing later. Worse still, the deployment order was already queued, pending final override authorization. And the access key? His single chilling message accompanied the file. Final stage requires engineer clearance. Use fallback psychological failsafe if necessary. Subject is emotionally compromised. Trackable. Subject. That's what he was now. Not Elias. Not husband. Not architect. Subject. He stood up from his desk and walked to the bathroom mirror. Stared at himself, hair messy, eyes bloodshot. His reflection didn't blink, and in that moment, he stopped, seeing himself as a victim. He began to see the battlefield. The next morning, he activated the first layer of his counterplan. At the coffee shop near the agency annex, he met with Mason Duell, a former cyber analyst turned off-grid contractor. They hadn't spoken in 4 years. Not since a classified blackout assignment in Belgium. Mason didn't ask why Elias wanted to meet. Just looked at the burner phone Elias slid across the table. You want these traced? No, Elias said quietly. I want them turned back on the people who sent them. Mason raised an eyebrow. You know what happens if we do that. Elias nodded. Yes, I'm counting on it. That same day, he initiated Phase 0. A dummy update file labeled AI Calibration Patch 4.1 was pushed to Nova's cloud servers using Sienna's credentials. It did nothing, except ping the server twice with a hidden sequence tag. A heartbeat, a silent flag. From that moment forward, every change made to the Obsidian Halo framework would mirror back to Elias's private archive. Every overwritten line of code, every request, every name, including Rourke's. Elias watched the log spool in like a storm forming in slow motion. That night, as Sienna slept upstairs, her breathing soft and even, Elias sat on the living room floor surrounded by cables and old hard drives. No anger in his eyes, just precision. His fingers moved like a surgeon's, not to destroy, not yet. To document, to preserve everything they thought he wouldn't see. Because revenge, Elias understood now, wasn't an outburst. It was a process, and the first step was making sure you never had to raise your voice. Only the truth. The files kept coming. Every night, while Sienna slept inches away from him, Elias watched his own technology turn into something monstrous. The predictive targeting logic he'd spent 5 years developing was being modified, line by line, into a system capable of launching autonomous strikes on pre-incident clusters, locations flagged by vague behavior metrics and anonymized metadata. It was pre-crime dressed in patriotic language. And behind it all was Nova Intel, pushing Obsidian Halo into final deployment under the guise of national defense. But it wasn't just theoretical. The timestamps told a darker story. Prototype assets were already active, drone units embedded within civilian zones, programmed with modified response parameters. Elias recognized the code signatures. They were his. The backbone of Obsidian Halo had been lifted from his early builds. And they hadn't just stolen his logic. They'd weaponized his name. The final push required only one thing: authentication from the original framework engineer, his credentials, his biometric clearance, his implicit trust in the system. They were going to use him as the fall guy. Buried in a folder labeled Contingency Tier 3, Elias found a recording. Poorly labeled, half-redacted, likely not meant to be stored on a synced device. It was audio only. But the voices were clear. Sienna. He's too deep into the system to see it. He still thinks the AI is just defense logic. Rourke. Then, let him sign it. Let the update go through. If it implodes, we blame the ghost engineer. If it works, we take credit. Sienna. He won't fight it. He still trusts me. Rourke. Then keep it that way. Sleep with him if you have to. The silence that followed in the recording was worse than the words. Elias didn't cry, didn't flinch. He simply reached for a pen and scribbled 2 lines in his notebook. They think I'm a user. I'm the system. He spent the next 3 nights rewriting the architecture of Obsidian Halo from inside its own shadow. Elias created a mirrored AI subroutine. Identical in function but coded to self-destruct upon deployment. This false halo would reroute its targeting systems into null space, simulate a launch, and confirm a successful strike, while actually hitting nothing. On paper, everything would look clean. In practice, it would reveal an internal contradiction, a worm that would trigger a silent audit. He called it Operation Hollowpoint. To make it work, Elias needed the chain of command to believe Obsidian Halo was functional. So he played his part. He submitted a final diagnostic review using Rourke's own update logs. He tagged Sienna's access ID to every major decision point. He placed code fragments inside her security tokens, undetectable unless decrypted with his master key. It was elegant, terrifyingly simple, and irreversible. Rourke had no idea he was about to walk into his own trap. On Thursday, Nova's internal test flight launched. 1 unmanned stealth unit, simulated fire zone, full system diagnostics online. Elias watched from a locked terminal inside his home office as the launch code initialized. Instead of launching on a populated grid, the drone rerouted, followed Elias's false logic, and deployed a strike on a remote stretch of ocean 300 miles off the Atlantic coast. To the team at Nova, it looked like success. Until 3 hours later, the secondary audit logs surfaced, showing multiple access points with conflicting authorizations. The code history traced back to Sienna Vale, her clearance, her digital fingerprints, her approval of a targeting algorithm that, upon further inspection, wasn't even hers to sign. At dinner that night, she was quiet, distracted. Elias poured them both a glass of wine. She didn't touch hers. They're running a patch audit. she said without looking up. Systems behaving unpredictably. Maybe someone changed the logic, Elias offered casually. Sienna narrowed her eyes. Not possible. Only 2 people have that level of access. He smiled faintly. Then it should be easy to figure out. Later that night, he activated the final component. A dummy flash drive planted inside her handbag. Inside it, a full audio recording, spliced from her own calls, detailing the override plan, the manipulation of Elias, and her admission of leaking AI logic to Nova for expedited protocol testing. All signed with her voice signature and tagged with her ID. She would find it too late. And when she did, the investigation would already be underway. They hadn't just betrayed the wrong man. They'd underestimated the one person who understood. Every backdoor they used because he built them. The walls were closing in, but Elias wasn't trapped. He was guiding the collapse. While Nova scrambled to decipher the unexpected anomalies in the Obsidian Halo simulation, Elias was already 3 moves ahead. Every system audit, every trace log, every internal review they launched only led them deeper into the maze he'd built. The beauty of his trap wasn't just that it exposed them, it was that it looked like their own system turning against them. The more they investigated, the more it confirmed what Elias had engineered, that the project had been compromised not by an outsider, but from within, by their own people, by the ones who had pushed it forward most aggressively. And that meant Sienna and Rourke. Elias watched the chaos unfold not from behind a screen but from within the system itself. He had become a shadow. Every keystroke they analyzed had his fingerprints because he put them there. Every error they chased had been designed, not discovered. In less than 72 hours, what began as a minor targeting glitch escalated into a full-blown internal breach. Access logs were subpoenaed. Audit teams from Joint Command requested full transparency. Nova hesitated. That alone raised red flags. By the weekend, Sienna had been pulled from field coordination. Her badge still scanned. Green, but her access was restricted. She pretended not to notice. She smiled when Elias poured her coffee. She still wore his hoodie in the mornings, just like before. Except now, he understood the performance wasn't for affection. It was for control. Her last tool wasn't manipulation. It was routine. Familiarity as camouflage. But Elias had stopped, playing her game weeks ago. He installed a final line of code into the system's behavior monitor, a signature embedded into the AI's decision tree that mimicked a logic gate error. If triggered, it would quietly execute a diagnostic dump that would reveal exactly when the AI had been altered, who had signed off on it, and how those changes bypassed original protocols. He named it Ghost Root, and once it was activated, there would be no unseeing it, no plausible deniability, no way back. That Sunday evening, Elias attended a Nova-hosted briefing mixer, something he normally avoided, but now treated as a necessary theater. The air was thick with tension masked by polite handshakes and fake laughter. Sienna worked the room effortlessly, just as she always had. Her charisma was intact, her control not so much. Rourke stood near the bar, jaw tense, posture defensive. He hadn't made eye contact with Elias since the Halo test. But Elias didn't need to be acknowledged. He needed to be ignored. That was the final step, disappearing from their suspicion just long enough to ensure their collapse looked self-inflicted. At 2:14 a.m., Elias sat alone in his garage, the lights off, the only illumination coming from his laptop screen. The system logs updated in real time. Red tags. Multiple access rejections. Cross-checks between Sienna's key and a flag Elias had slipped into the protocol under a harmless-sounding file. Operation Orchid. She'd tried to bypass it 3 times in the last hour. He smirked. She was panicking. And panic makes smart people careless. By dawn, Elias was in the control room of his division's AI lab, feigning business as usual. He reviewed system behavior. Reports nodded through team updates, approved non-critical patches, everything to remain in the background. But the truth was, the performance was no longer about hiding. It was about witnessing. He wanted to see them fall. At 10:37 a.m. it happened. An internal memo was accidentally leaked to the wrong inbox. Elias watched the subject line pop up across Nova's internal comm grid. Unauthorized signature chains. Project Halo. Urgent audit priority. A quiet, administrative earthquake. 3 minutes later, Sienna stormed into Rourke's office. She didn't know the walls were bugged. Elias did. He listened in real time as she hissed through clenched teeth. He knows. Elias knows. We've been set up. Rourke snapped back. No, we've been mirrored. Someone's rewriting our logs, ghosting us with our own decisions. That was the first time Elias allowed himself a small, bitter smile. Yes, he thought. Now you understand. They weren't falling because he attacked them. They were falling because he let their lies consume themselves. Because Elias Quinn didn't just dismantle their plan. He became the ghost inside it. By the time Monday arrived, Nova Intel was no longer trying to cover their tracks. They were tripping over them. The internal breach had triggered a multi-agency audit. Cybersecurity teams from external oversight agencies were now involved, requesting full log access and third-party replication of Obsidian Halo's targeting framework. The audit wasn't just procedural, it was surgical, and Elias had designed every breadcrumb to lead straight to the hands that manipulated the system, Sienna and Rourke. But the brilliance of Elias's setup wasn't just that it pointed fingers. It did so using their own evidence, their own signatures, their own voices. He had spent weeks crafting a synthetic audio trail using fragments of security briefings and personal calls. The flash drive he planted in Sienna's bag, labeled innocuously, as a threat vector analysis, was now activated. When she opened it, likely in a panic, she triggered the final trap. Inside were stitched voice memos of her discussing phase deployment with Rourke, spliced meticulously to sound authentic. She would claim it was faked, and she'd be right. But it was too perfect, too precise. And it was now evidence. Sienna didn't confront Elias, not directly, but her eyes did. The morning after the drive was opened, she stared at him across the kitchen table like she was trying to read the fine print of a contract she didn't remember signing. He didn't blink. He just chewed quietly, the same way he did the first morning she lied to him about working late. "Coffee?" he asked calmly. "No," she said flatly, setting her mug down untouched. "I have a meeting." "I'm sure you do." She froze for a fraction of a second, long enough to confirm everything she feared. That afternoon, the storm broke. 2 men in dark suits arrived at Nova headquarters. Not military, not internal affairs, something quieter. They carried no visible ID, but everyone knew. When they asked to speak to Sienna Vale, no one stopped them. When they entered Rourke's office 10 minutes later, voices were raised, then silenced. The doors closed. Elias didn't need to be there. He'd seen it before, in data trails and backdoors, in code that didn't lie. By sunset, the fallout was tangible. Rourke's security clearance was revoked. His name was scrubbed from the Halo Initiative. No press release, no formal announcement. Just a man walking through a glass hallway carrying a box that held nothing of value. Just enough to pretend he wasn't being erased. Sienna wasn't escorted out, not yet. She was too valuable, or at least she had been. But her badge no longer opened the server room. Her communications were flagged for review. She had become, officially, a risk vector. That night, Elias walked into their bedroom where she was sitting stiffly on the edge of the bed, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked up, met his eyes, and said in a voice so low it barely reached him, "Why?" He stared at her for a long moment, then crossed the room and sat beside her. Not too close. "Because you didn't just betray me," he said evenly. "You tried to rewrite who I was, what I built. You used my silence as permission. You took my code and aimed it at people who would never know my name. That's not betrayal, Sienna. That's erasure." She blinked but said nothing. "I didn't destroy you," he continued. "I let you destroy yourself. I just turned on the lights." She opened her mouth, perhaps to defend herself, perhaps to beg. but nothing came out. For the first time, since this began, she looked like someone who didn't have a plan, and Elias finally felt still. In the early morning hours, as the system syncs across Nova finalized, Elias uploaded one last command from his private, untraceable channel. The file was labeled Audit Trigger Failsafe Alpha. It linked all mirrored activity from Obsidian Halo back to two access keys, Sienna Vale and Adrian Rourke. The metadata was airtight, the timestamps immutable, the voice log confirmed by biometric tone match at 97.2% certainty, and then he logged off. Not with a flourish. Not with vengeance, with finality, because the truth was, Elias had never needed to ruin them. They had already done that themselves. He just gave them the perfect reflection. For 48 hours, the silence around Elias was deafening. Sienna stopped, pretending. She no longer offered small talk or attempts at domestic normalcy. Her presence in the house became ghost-like, moving through hallways with the caution of someone who finally understood they were walking through a minefield they helped build. She barely ate. She no longer tried to fake sleep. But Elias didn't gloat. He didn't taunt. He simply observed, just as he had from the beginning. On the third night, the final twist arrived. Not from Sienna, not from Nova, but from a voice Elias had never heard before. At precisely 2:03 a.m., his private workstation pinged, an alert from an encrypted port he hadn't used in years. The message wasn't an email. It was a live command line, routed through multiple obfuscated servers. The signature was clean, cold, and intentional. "We've been watching. You weren't supposed to win. But now that you have, we'd like to offer you something more." Attached, Project Mirror, Phase 2. No name, no source, just a file and a line of dialogue that felt less like a reward and more like a test. Elias stared at it for a long time. The folder contained data, layers of it, referencing covert AI infrastructure, deeper than Nova, older than Obsidian Halo. It hinted at a system beneath systems, where policy and morality were replaced by predictive manipulation. A world where war wasn't declared, it was calculated, anticipated, pre-simulated. Elias had built parts of this logic once in theory, but here it was, active. He didn't open the full file. Instead, he copied it onto a fresh drive, one without a wireless interface, then shut the system down. A chill moved through him, not of fear, but recognition. This wasn't Nova. This was something worse, something more patient. If Rourke and Sienna had been the agents, this was the architect. He'd been a tool, then a liability. Now perhaps a candidate. The next morning, he stood at the threshold of their kitchen, watching Sienna pack a suitcase. No words, no explanations. She stopped once, holding a small photo of them, taken years earlier in Prague, back when the warmth between them was real, before it had become leverage. She folded the photo, not tearing it, not saving it, just reducing it. Like she was unsure whether to remember or forget. "I'm being reassigned," she said softly. "Of course you are," Elias replied. She paused at the door, hand on the knob, her eyes searching his one last time. "Was any of it real for you?" Elias didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because the truth didn't belong to her anymore. She left without another word. Across town, Rourke wasn't given the chance to leave quietly. Military security detained him at a private airstrip just minutes before boarding a chartered flight. The charge? Unauthorized system manipulation, compromising federal defense integrity. The evidence? His voice, his code trail, his digital approval of an unregulated targeting algorithm. Exactly what Elias had planted. Rourke had been ruthless, but arrogant. He had underestimated Elias's ability to mirror not just systems, but intentions. At headquarters, the fallout widened. Investigators recovered the dummy flash drive planted in Sienna's personal safe. The drive was empty, visibly, but it contained a micro-layered data ghost. When decrypted, it revealed a full chain of unauthorized code approvals initiated from Her credentials corroborated by the embedded voice memos Elias had engineered with surgical precision. The case became airtight. No courtroom, no news bulletin. Just quiet removal, sealed records, and blank spaces where names used to be. For Elias, it wasn't justice in the legal sense. It was precision, clarity, the satisfaction of knowing that systems don't fall from brute force. They collapse from within when you understand exactly where to push. 1 week later, a courier arrived at Elias's door. No uniform, no insignia. He delivered a plain envelope. Inside, a single card with one sentence printed in gray ink. You've proven you're useful in more ways than you realize. We'll be in touch. Elias burned the card the moment the door closed. He knew what they were offering. Recruitment into something deeper, darker, more permanent. But he hadn't done this to be recruited. He hadn't burned his life to join another machine. He had done it because someone had to draw the line, quietly, precisely, and without apology. And now that it was drawn, he had no intention of crossing it again. Let the ghosts come. Elias Quinn had already become one. Some stories end with a bang. Others end with silence, the kind that lingers in a room long after the people have left. Elias Quinn didn't choose revenge for spectacle. He didn't want applause, or pity, or even understanding. He chose it because it was the only language left that his enemies respected, consequence wrapped in precision. Justice delivered with surgical calm. He didn't destroy the system. He showed it to itself, and let it collapse under the weight of its own lies. So ask yourself this: if the person you trusted most betrayed not just your heart, but your legacy, your identity, your life's work, would you scream, or would you go quiet and rewrite the rules? Let us know in the comments below. Would you disappear into peace or engineer the fall yourself? And if this story made you feel something, anger, clarity, inspiration, share it. Not for the algorithm, but for the people who know what it's gay. Like to rebuild quietly? Like, subscribe. Join us next time, and remember, sometimes the loudest justice is the one no one sees coming.